Forget the textbooks and the dates. Let's talk about the impossible audacity, the inherent contradictions, and the sheer, relentless drive that built the United States. This isn't just a chronology. It's the story of a nation born in revolution, tested by its own internal demons, and forever reshaping the global landscape. The stage was set millennia ago, not with European ships, but with the complex, flourishing societies of Native American nations, the Iroquois, the Pueblo, the Cherokee, who cultivated the land, developed sophisticated governance, and established vast trading networks long before the Great Collision. That collision began in the late 15th century, culminating in the early 1600s with the establishment of fragile English outposts like Jamestown, 1607, a venture driven by profit and tobacco, and Plymouth, 1620, rooted in religious idealism and the quest for a city upon a hill. But as these colonies took hold, a profound paradox began to define the American experiment. The pursuit of freedom and prosperity was built upon the brutal foundation of chattel slavery, which began in 1619, guaranteeing that the struggle for liberty would always be intertwined with the fight for racial justice. The 13 colonies matured through the 1700s, developing distinct regional identities: the industrializing North, the agrarian, slave-based South, and the diverse middle colonies. This growth inevitably brought friction with the mother country, Great Britain. After the costly French and Indian War, Parliament sought to tax the colonies directly, sparking the cry of no taxation without representation. This was the tinderbox. The colonists, exhibiting a reckless courage few foresaw, transitioned from protest to war, culminating in the Declaration of Independence in 1776, a document that made a radical, universal claim: all men are created equal. The ensuing Revolutionary War, led by George Washington, was a triumph of endurance and international aid, ultimately securing independence. But winning the war was only half the battle. Governing the disparate states proved equally challenging. The weak Articles of Confederation were tossed out in favor of the U.S. Constitution, 1787, a brilliant, intricate system of checks and balances that, tragically, preserved the institution of slavery to secure Southern ratification, most notably through the Three-Fifths Compromise. The new nation's story in the 19th century was defined by two unstoppable forces: westward expansion and the growing crisis over slavery. Fueled by manifest destiny, the belief that the nation was divinely ordained to stretch from coast to coast, the U.S. aggressively acquired land, most dramatically with the Louisiana Purchase, 1803. This expansion came at a horrific cost, accelerating the forced removal and displacement of Native American tribes epitomized by the devastating Trail of Tears. As the country marched west, the economic and moral divide over slavery became an unhealable wound. The industrializing North and the cotton-rich South, whose wealth was entirely dependent on enslaved labor, grew further apart. Political compromises only delayed the inevitable, and the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 triggered the secession of Southern states and the outbreak of the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. This war was the nation's bloodiest test, a conflict fought to preserve the Union and, ultimately, to end slavery, confirmed by the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. After the Union victory, the Reconstruction era briefly offered hope for racial equality, but white supremacist violence and political compromise quickly curtailed those gains, leading to nearly a century of Jim Crow segregation. The late 19th century, the Gilded Age, was characterized by astonishing industrial growth, massive immigration waves, and the rise of powerful titans of industry like Rockefeller and Carnegie. America rapidly shifted from an agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse, albeit one marked by huge disparities between the ultra-rich and the urban working poor. This inequality sparked the Progressive Era, a push for government regulation, consumer protection, and greater democracy, exemplified by figures like Teddy Roosevelt. By 1898, through the Spanish-American War,
the U.S. was actively engaged in overseas imperialism, asserting itself as a global player. The 20th century cemented America's status as a superpower. The nation tried to maintain neutrality in World War I before its intervention proved decisive. The economic boom of the 1920s crashed spectacularly in 1929, ushering in the Great Depression. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal programs fundamentally reshaped the role of the federal government, establishing the social safety net that remains today. The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 dragged the U.S. into World War II, an all-out mobilization that transformed the nation into the arsenal of democracy, and left it in 1945 as the world's undisputed dominant economic and military power. This dominance immediately led to the Cold War, a decades-long ideological and military standoff with the Soviet Union, defining American foreign policy and culture, with proxy conflicts, Korea, Vietnam, and the intense competition of the space race. Domestically, the post-war era saw the crucial moral reckoning of the civil rights movement. Led by activists like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this movement successfully dismantled legal segregation through nonviolent protest and landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The latter half of the century saw the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, leaving the U.S. as the sole superpower, poised for a new globalized world. The 21st century began with the devastating 9/11 attacks, which ushered in the costly war on terror and intensified national security debates. Today, the U.S. is grappling with unprecedented political polarization, rapid technological change, profound wealth inequality, and a shift in global order. The history of the United States, therefore, is not a simple ascent to greatness, but a complex, often brutal, and always evolving narrative of aspiration versus execution, a constant, dramatic struggle to live up to the impossible promises it made to itself 250 years ago. Consulting qualified experts can always provide deeper context and specialized analysis on specific historical events or their modern implications. And that's something worth remembering when you consider the complexity beneath the simple idea of America.